So last week we had our panel discussion. By the way, give it up for everybody that participated on our panel. We discussed issues or we discussed questions that you guys had, but there were a few questions that we did not address. And I think everybody has probably wrestled with this question before. So what happens when we pray and we don't hear anything? What happens when we pray and there's silence? Three things we can do or three things we can think about. One, maybe we don't know God's voice good enough to actually hear him. Maybe the problem isn't God isn't speaking. Maybe the problem is we're deaf to what God is saying. Two, Psalm 66:18 says, "If I regard wickedness in my heart, the Lord will not hear me." Maybe there's some sin in our lives, in our hearts, that we haven't acknowledged. Maybe it's something that we don't want to admit that's a sin or a wrong that we're holding on to. And we just want to ignore that, and we just want God to ignore that. Three, I wrestle with this. I know a lot of other people that wrestle with this. Waiting is the hardest thing to do, or one of the hardest things to do. Some of us rather climb Mount Everest than to sit and wait on the Lord, or sit and wait in silence. Silence is deafening. John 3:11 tells us of a story about Mary and Martha. Their brother Lazarus was sick. By the time Jesus shows up, Mary and Martha, they've lost hope in the fact that they believe that their brother is deceased. Lazarus had been dead. He was already encased in his tomb. And Jesus said, "Roll the stone away." They rolled the stone away. Jesus said, "Come forth, Lazarus." And Lazarus came forth. The moral of the story is this. Sometimes when we pray, just because we don't hear anything doesn't mean that God isn't working or God isn't moving. Sometimes it means we just need to wait and wait patiently on the Lord. Second question, what if I messed up plan A? Pastor Greg, is there a plan B? The Bible is full of stories about people missing out on opportunities. Also, an equal amount of stories where people had the opportunity to go back and reap the benefits of a second chance. One of those people who had a second chance was Jesus' brother himself, James. The Bible tells us that Jesus' family, not Mary, but his brothers, didn't quite believe that Jesus was the Son of God. I mean, how would you feel if your brother or sister all of a sudden said that they were God's only son or God's only daughter? Say what? But I'm pretty sure a lot of us would look at them sideways, and rightfully so. So third and final question, and we touched on this topic briefly last week, but I wanted to revisit it one last time. And the question was, will people always know when God is speaking to them? And I believe this varies depending on where you are in your faith, where you are in your relationship with God, and your maturity within your faith. Some people would maybe argue the fact, but I believe that the Bible clearly shows us that people don't always recognize when God is speaking to them. In fact, if you look at 1 Samuel chapter 3, verses 1 through 14, it tells us about a young Samuel who hears God's voice in the middle of the night, and he gets up thinking that his teacher Eli was calling him, and he runs to the room and says, "Teacher, I am here." And Eli goes, "Samuel, I didn't call you. Go back to bed." This happened 3 times, and finally Eli said, "Samuel, it's not I calling you. It must be the Lord. So next time you go to bed, when the Lord calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord. Your servant is listening.'" So this example clearly shows us that people don't always realize when God is speaking to them.